Hey everyone, I want to break down my current dividend portfolio, how much money I'm making off my $210,000 portfolio, and then how I'm maximizing my potential gains with options. So we're going to get into first what I am holding, which is United Healthcare. I currently have 700 shares of United Healthcare, actually like 710, and I'm about to buy a couple more, give or take 700 shares, which currently the yield is $2.21 per share per quarter, or $8.84 per year. United Healthcare, I have also sold different calls on in order to increase my potential yield, although capping my gains at about 30%, which I'm fine with. That would be overvalued in my opinion if it went up by over 30% in a year, so then I would sell. So, United Healthcare, we'll start with all this numbers. What does it mean? Well, first off, here's the big ones that I can go through. My $210,000 portfolio right now, 2025, is earning $6,188 per year in income. And actually, no, I wouldn't update if I did that. But still, $6,188 a year from doing nothing, just from income from the stock. Pretty incredible. This is growing at about 16 to 18% a year. You can go over to United Healthcare. They've been growing their dividends consistently by well over the market's growth, market beating dividend increases. This one says negative 20%. That's because they haven't paid out their final dividend yield or dividend installment for the year. This would be $8.84 if it actually was correctly updated. So consistently growing, even with the current constraints with their stock and current profitability, they are still having no issues making that payment. Because of that, and reinvesting my dividends, I'm actually increasing the amount of shares that I have. So by the end of 2029, I'm going to have an extra 88 shares, which ends up being, by the end of 2029, with their growth and with the extra shares, I'm going to be making $12,000 a year. $12,000 a year just off of United Healthcare dividends. Pretty incredible. Which, as you guys you can do the math on it. The yield, because I do have covered calls, which brings up my amount of shares owned without using any margin, blah, 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 is for me right now like 3%. And we can do the math for it. Equals 6,000 divided by, actually the other way around, 210,000. This. No, it was the right way. I guess I'm slow today. This number divided by $210,000, which is a yield of, format, number, percent, 2.95%, right about the 3% I was saying. So because of selling covered calls, which gives you more equity, which you can then reinvest into more shares without really any extra risk, I'm able to push the yield up quite a bit. Then I am inflating that yield by almost double by selling calls. United Healthcare currently is at $340 a share. My selling point for United Healthcare, I see it growing fairly at about 15% a year for the next 5 years, which means for me, I would sell at, as you guys can see, about $430, when you consider the call that's actually selling at $450 a share. So $450 shares when I would sell. So that's when I have sold my covered calls to reduce my risk. Ends up being, as you can see, even above this dip point. I'd be selling it about, around here, which is quite a bit above where we are and before even really the drop had happened. So that, when you do the valuation for it, it makes sense as well, because I don't see United Health hitting 450 share until 2029. If it hits 450 up here, I'm fine with the capped gain of about 30%, which is increased by other options which I've sold. So going over how I'm making more money, currently I'd be making $6,188 a year off of income from the stock, even if the stock stays flat. But I've sold calls. How many? I've sold 7 on my 700 shares, which the September 430 calls are worth $2,000 a piece. The September 440 calls worth about $1,700 a piece. Ends up being a total of $12,000 extra income by the end of the year. Again, these do cap my gain at 30%, but regardless, this is $12,000 of extra income that I'm going to be making, which is a 6% extra return on money and then a 5.9% extra return on money on those. Next, I've also sold 3 puts. So same as the calls, sold puts means that I think it's going to go up. If if you're buying a put, you think it's going to go down. If you sell a put, you think it's going to go up. Currently, I've sold $370 puts, which are $3,000 in the money right now, which means if the stock stays flat, I'll be making $9,000 by the end of the year, which is a 6.3% return. Of course, the stock could go up, and these would expire worthless. If the stock is above 370, I will be making $18,000 a year off of the United Healthcare puts, which ends up being $30,000 in 1 year, a 10% return off of just options. That's assuming the stock stays flat. Again, these puts work both ways, which means that if the stock goes down, it can kind of counteract everything that we're doing here. So basically, the fact that we have both sold puts and sold calls means that I think it's going to stay within a certain range of the current stock price or appreciate slightly. I see it appreciating above 370 and below 430. It's kind of a spread. I couldn't sell more than 3 puts margin-wise. It would just be too risky. So that is where we're at right now, which ends up being a 10% yield, even if nothing really happens. So, yeah, that is my current portfolio, my current investments. You can see that by selling calls, which limit your returns, but the thing people overlook with calls is when they have a 6% equity spread on them, you can buy 6% more shares than you would have otherwise, right? Like, I can have, if I had, which is what I did, 100 shares of United Healthcare, and I can't quite afford another 100 shares. I can only afford 95. I can sell a call to then buy more shares, so that even though my gains are slightly lower, I actually own 6% more shares than I would have by selling that call. So kind of interesting how that works. People kind of forget about that when selling calls, especially on super high implied volatility stocks. Sometimes some of the like meme stocks, you can buy a stock for like a share for like $5 and then sell a call for like $4, right? Which only happens on super crazy meme stocks, right? But it happens sometimes, like with some of the weed stocks when that stuff was happening. This is about the spread you were getting, which is crazy. Which then, say you had 500 shares of something and you sold $400 worth, and each share is $1, and you got, $400. You can buy 400 more shares, which means now what was only $500 of shares is actually now 900 shares, and you can still sell 4 more calls, and you're gonna get whatever, like 300 and something more shares, and you can sell 3 more calls on that and buy 200 more shares, sell 2 more calls, and what ends up being what was 500 shares ends up being like 15 or 1200 shares or whatever, depending on the implied volatility that you're getting. And sure, you have a capped gain, but now that capped gain is on 2.4% more shares, 2.4 times more shares. So it ends up actually kind of balancing out and can be very, very good risk-wise, which is why I've done it here. 6% means that I can get a non-negligible amount more of shares. I mean, I have a $243,000 portfolio right now, which is not on margin. Like, I don't owe money right now. I'm not being charged margin interest. It is on margin, but I'm not negative cash balance because of how basically I get paid $12,000 right now, and then I was able to buy $12,000 of extra stock with this. And then I was also able to get paid $18,000 for selling these puts to buy $18,000 more of stock. Again, this one is a little bit more risky because it can go down and jeopardize things. But the calls, these honestly are just extra $12,000 of shares. Not too bad. Everything has risk, but it's a different kind of risk. Missing out on gains technically is a risk, but it's a different kind of risk versus selling a put. Not quite the same. Honestly, I don't recommend doing that for anyone, but yeah, pretty interesting. So my projections, this is off of stock appreciation, but it does not include the options, which means by the end of the year, I'm expecting the $24,000 plus the option income, which should be about $21,000. So I should be making $45,000 within the next year, which if you guys can do quick math on, divided by our current portfolio value, which the actual portfolio value, if you guys remember, is only actually $210,000, which is a 22% return within a year. That's pretty good, right? I mean, that's well above market beating, which is why I'm doing this. And if this ends up actually being the $30,000, right? 30,565, and then so that ends up being $54,000 within a year, and then divided by the 210. So then that ends up being a 26% 1 year return, which is about what I'm expecting. There's a capped max gain on this of about 35% or something. Actually, it's definitely more than that because of how the leverage built into this works, but pretty crazy. So short answer, $6,188. Long answer, I'll be making more like $21,000. And this is without the dividends. So yeah, $21,000 is just the option income plus dividends. So it's actually going to be $27,000 without stock appreciation. So pretty cool. $27,000 without the stock going up $1. Although this will go down significantly if the stock does go down. I mean, but that's how everything works, right? So thanks for watching.